What I was looking at is really the Judicial Commission of Inquiry, which is the route that the Marikana Commission went. And there are other ways that you could have gone. You could have gone for prosecution, you could have gone for a civilian commission of inquiry, you could have gone for a TRC type commission. But the choice was for Judicial Commission of Inquiry. And then I looked at the shortcomings of such an inquiry, and I also looked at the value of a judicial inquiry. I think that the values, I first looked at the value, and that was that Judicial Commissions of Inquiry are led by the judiciary and not by the executive. So they have a lot more independence than the executive, if you had an executive commission would have. And also they're often run by judges and by other commissioners who are lawyers, which means that they're sort of independent or more likely to be independent, free from bias, and also they're informed by the South African Constitution. And so people have more confidence in them as a way of doing an inquiry. Also, commissions of inquiries are better than court procedures because they're much broader. They allow for all sorts of other factors to come in, for a wide range of parties to be represented, and they also allow for the media to come in and for the public to have a kind of involvement that they would never have in any other truth-finding institution. And then I think they also, they are powerful because they investigate, but they also are allowed to make recommendations. So they bring out a report, they can make recommendations. And those recommendations may or may not be implemented by governments. But what they do is they bring the debate into the public terrain, usually on an issue like migrant labour that people have forgotten about, put aside, don't even think about. And they focus the public's attention on that. And by focusing the public's attention, they also, judicial inquiries have very deep investigative qualities because they can subpoena, and also people sort of feel they have to cooperate with such commissions. So, and by doing that, they give a depth to the kind of debates that are happening in society around those issues. So those were some of the strengths, and then I looked at some of the shortcomings. And I looked particularly at the Marikana Commission through all of this. And some of the shortcomings is that the Marikana Commission was very adversarial. You had lawyers ranged against each other, the human rights lawyers versus lawmen and the police, basically. And that meant that people got very defensive. And instead of it being an environment which I've just described, where it should be much more open, truth-telling is more likely to come out of that kind of situation, much more open than a court case. Partly because you can't use any material from the commission in a later court case. You're not allowed to do that. So that means that it's a more open, should be less defensive environment, but it wasn't like that at the Marikana Commission. It was very adversarial. From the beginning, lawyers represent certain parties that were in the terms of reference, and they were pitted against each other. I do think there was some real success, especially the evidence leaders in digging down deep and coming up with some truths, but they also faced the problem that the police were lying everywhere. They were lying, they were not bringing documents that they should, they were doctoring documents, they were planting guns next to mine workers. So they had to deal with all of this lack of truth happening, although it was under oath, at the same time as trying to dig out the truth. So what I'm saying is that they're a partial success, judicial commissions of inquiry. And this lack of truth is not just in South Africa. Commissions of inquiry the world over, people lie through the teeth, authorities lie through their teeth to protect themselves rather than to protect the social or sort of open things up to a wider debate. One of the major problems with commissions of inquiry in South Africa is that they are appointed by the presidency, which is the executive, which is the government, if you like. And because they're appointed by them, the terms of reference, the commissioners, how long it happens, and also the release of the report is all determined by the executive rather than by the judiciary. And there's a big debate in Canada where commissions of inquiry are sort of really use quite a lot, and I appreciate it as a way of transparently looking at issues, that there should be an independent agency that actually sets up commissions, sets up the terms of reference, appoints the commissioners, decides in the first place whether there's a commission or not. And that's independent from government, and then they make strong recommendations to government so that government can't interfere with it. And they also make sure the report or whatever comes out of the commission gets out to the public at the end. And I just think that we need to, in South Africa, look at that kind of model very carefully. And then finally, I think that people sort of overload commissions of inquiry. They have huge expectations of them to find out all the truth. And what I think is really, it's just the beginning of cracking the truth. You see certain lights, certain cracks, certain responsibilities. But really it's what happens after the commission that's important. That the families of the deceased, other people who have interests, support groups, go on digging and investigating. And this has happened in other places where you have an initial inquiry, one verdict, the digging goes on, another inquiry is appointed, and a completely opposite verdict may happen. And I think that may well happen in the case of the Marikana Commission. The families are not going to let it. There's certain support groups. They're not going to let it go. And so the digging happens often in a much less politically charged environment. And people often want to tell the truth later on. They might have lied earlier, but they actually want to come out with the truth very often. And I think this might start filling in all the gaps that the Commission was not able to answer.